It's all good. All right. Folks, today we're going to look at three different topics. We're going to be looking at why Spain, or how did Spain develop in the early modern period. We're going to be looking at witchcraft persecution. Then we're going to be looking at Baroque art. Why was Spain a major power in 1525 but declined? If you were a betting person and there were a Las Vegas to go bet on who's going to be the major world power in 1750 or 1700, the odds would have been placed on Spain. Everyone would have expected that they're the Patriots and Tom Brady of the early modern period. They're always going to be in the winner's circle. And like Tom Brady and the Patriots, there were lots of people who just hated Spain, okay? Just because they were Spain. Just like people hate the Patriots and Tom Brady today. Spain, though, has got kind of an interesting past. Spain actually was not a unified country for the first part of this. We, in a lot of survey history courses, just talk about Spain like it's a real deal unified country and was back then, but it really wasn't. It wasn't. Spain actually had been, for years, the one area of Europe where there had been Moors. And do you remember what a Moor is?
Are those the Muslims?
Yes, very good. They were the Muslims. They had originally expanded during the Umayyad Empire, and they had gone up and gone actually into France. And if you remember, Charles Martel, Charlemagne's grandpa, stopped them at the Battle of Tours. And for the most part, the Moors or the Muslims stayed in the Iberian Peninsula, or Spain, right there. Now, slowly, over time, there were Catholics who defeated some of the Moors and took more and more and more land back. Finally, in 1492, you know 1492 because Columbus sailed the ocean blue and just accidentally discovered the New World. But this, remember I had you learn where the town of Sevilla was, or Seville as we'd say in southeast Missouri? Well, that whole province over there, down there, we'd say down here, this was the last area, this was the last bastion of Moorish or Muslim territory in Europe. And in 1492, King Ferdinand of Aragon, which is this kind of strip over here on the coast, and Isabella of Castile, which is kind of this larger strip of the Iberian Peninsula, they got married, and their combined forces defeated the Moors, who were headquartered in Seville. And so in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella, by marrying, they ruled parts of Spain. You know, like Portugal's just kind of peeled off from here? That's kind of what Castile and Aragon, and there were a few other provinces kind of like that. And their marriage is going to sort of unify that. Plus, they get rid of the Moors. And this is going to have massive cultural implications for Spain. In the wake of 9/11, we tend to view Muslims through the lens of 9/11. And so we tend to think about Osama bin Laden and jihadists and those kinds of things. But Muslims in the medieval and early modern period were way tolerant and way enlightened. And they didn't persecute people. And in fact, they were cool with Jews. Christians weren't. So, seriously, they weren't. It is kind of weird because a lot of Christians blame Jews for the crucifixion of Jesus, like Mel Gibson still does apparently. That was kind of a deal. So Jews throughout Europe had actually migrated to Moorish Spain and settled down. And Jews and Muslims lived together as people of the book. They got along fine. And then Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492 conquer all of Spain. And of course, Ferdinand and Isabella are what religiously? Strong Catholics. And so basically what Ferdinand and Isabella do is that they require that the people who are Muslims or Jews do one of the following options. You convert to Catholicism.
Muslim and Jews?
Muslims or Jews, doesn't matter. And if you converted, you were called a conversos, like converted, but in Spanish, conversos. Then, or you could stay and be put to death as a heretic. It's not a good option. Or 3, you could choose to move. Now, how did Ferdinand and Isabella and future Spaniards make sure that the conversos stayed converted? They developed something that nobody ever expects, called the Spanish Inquisition. And what the Spanish Inquisition would be, if we think that Natasha here, she has been a Muslim, but now Natasha has converted, we're going to come back every so often and give her a test. We're going to interview some of her friends to see if she's a legit Christian or if she's just pretending and still practicing her Muslim faith. And the Spanish Inquisition did kind of a 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing. So the first time you could recant and they'd say, okay, do-over. Second time you could do-over. Third time what would happen? You burned at the stake. You were tortured and eliminated. And so this was kind of a pretty powerful thing. So Spain, because of this change, you might say, well, this is nice background, Reeves. What does all this have to do? Well, one, it kind of tells you something about the religious diversity that was and that was not in Spain. 2, it tells you what kind of religious view the leadership of Spain had in the early modern period. What were they? Catholics. And weak Catholics, strong Catholics. Strong Catholics. Okay? So in some ways, Spain was what would become unified Spain was the most Catholic of all of the countries. Do you remember talking about the Jesuits? And who was the founder of the Jesuits? Ignatius of Loyola. Where was he from? You knew it? Yeah, all right. Ignatius. He was from Spain. A lot of Catholic, strong Catholic leaders were from Spain. Well, so this gives you a little background. Ferdinand and Isabella's grandson was Charles V. And Charles V does a couple of really super important things. First of all, he squanders all of the resources of the New World to speak of. You know, I had the privilege to go to Spain 20 years ago. It's a nice place, great country. I had a student there get mugged, and another one got bit by a jellyfish. It was a great time.
Jellyfish bite?
Yes,
Wow.
bitten,
Okay.
leached onto them.
Wow.
Yeah, it is. We told them, please don't go swimming. And what did they do?
Go swim.
Went swimming. Why did we tell them not to go swimming? Because there were jellyfish in that part of the Mediterranean. They didn't believe us. Then afterwards they did. But hey, they got the experience of being bitten by a jellyfish.
You know, they can bite you and sting you.
Yeah, or sting you, I'm sorry.
It's like, how do jellyfish bite?
Kept asking.
They bite and sting.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not as in tune with my jellyfish as you are. Yes, or my wife. Yes, she's better in all regards. Okay, so Charles V is basically going to rule almost all of, or 3/4 of Europe. He ruled Spain as the inherited king. Interestingly enough, guess what language he did not speak?
Spanish.
Spanish. He spoke 6 languages, but Spanish was not one of them. Okay? Which made it a little awkward sometimes. he also was the emperor of New Spain, which largely was everything from what we would consider Texas to California, all the way through South America. That was a lot of territory. Okay? A lot of gold, a lot of silver. Okay? He was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and he controlled all of the Dutch countries, the Netherlands, the Dutch Republic, what we would consider Belgium. So he controlled basically 2/3 to 3/4 of Europe. But the problem was, and I mentioned, he really thought that Catholicism was the way, the truth, and the life. And, you know, what's going on in the German states in the Holy Roman Empire during his reign from 1519 to 1556? What's going down? Who's the big guy stirring stuff up in Germany? Martin Luther, very good. And Martin Luther and Protestantism is tearing apart Europe. So Charles thinks that he's God's man on earth to defend the Holy Mother Catholic Church. He fights the Lutheran forces in the Schmalkaldic Wars. And that just devastates the Holy Roman Empire. But it also devastates Spain. Because Spain was spending a lot of money on a new world empire. You know, in Central and South America and parts of North America. Foreign wars and conquering people and killing them, like the Spaniards did, and many Europeans did. I don't see the label the Spaniards as bad for imperialism. Costs a lot of money. And you would think all of that gold and silver would be going back, wouldn't you, to build things in Spain. But where was it really going? It was war money. They were going, that money was bypassing Spain and its treasury and going straight into the Catholic wars against Protestants of Germany. And so that's going to have a pretty devastating effect on the economy of Spain. The more Spain spends on conquering the New World, the less return they're actually kind of getting out of it. Ultimately, as you know, Charles V resigns in 1556 after the Peace of Augsburg is signed, and he's kind of one of the key engines behind that. And with the Peace of Augsburg, each prince gets to decide, or whatever the prince is in the Holy Roman Empire for what little area you're in, ultimately is going to be the prince that is going to be the religion. That if Duke is Catholic, you're Catholic. If your Duke is Mennonite, you're Mennonite, so on and so forth. Or Lutheran, you're Lutheran. And he's very discouraged, retires to the mountains and paints and waits to die. In Spain, his son, Philip II, comes to power after he resigns all of his titles. And Philip courts first Mary Tudor, and then after Mary Tudor is killed in 1558, he courts Elizabeth I. Ultimately, he and Elizabeth have spats, and he sends in 1588, because of the English privateer raids, he sends the Armada. And by sending the Armada in 1558, what does he do to the fate of Spain's navy and military power throughout the world? He loses it. So, you know, his dad basically spends the money on another foreign war in Germany. Philip, basically, to destroy England, inadvertently destroys virtually all of his navy. So ultimately what happens is that Spain becomes, in this 100-year period, it goes from a period of feeling great and powerful because it had reconquered the Iberian or Spanish peninsula from the Muslims, and we've discovered the New World, we've got all this gold and silver, to by 1600 and the end of Philip II's reign, what are they? They're broke and really without an effective navy and military. Now this doesn't mean that Spain does not have any value or worth, but it does mean they're no longer on the cutting edge of European power like they were for that 100 years. And so these are kind of the reasons why Spain declines. Does this make sense?
So Spain became broke because there's spent the money on.
Okay, yeah, on the Protestant wars, because he was also a Holy Roman Emperor. And so Charles was overspending all that kind of money. Okay? He was also spending money on colonizing the New World. Does that make sense? And then Philip II made that mistake with the Armada. What's that? Yeah, that was a big piece of it. Which further enhanced something that became known in Protestant countries as the Black Legend. And the Black Legend was this notion that Spain was Spanish culture and Spanish Catholicism in particular was kind of inherently evil, and this was kind of an idea that the English and Northern Protestants kind of put forth. It was a little bit racist, you know, but it is what it is. I don't know if they were any more evil than any of the English were in how they treated folks in the New World. All right. Let's talk a little bit about witchcraft persecution. I'm just going to skip them.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Spain is basically, that gets you the arc, he kind of completes it. Witchcraft persecution. You notice anywhere that there is yellow or red, there was a great amount of witchcraft persecution. You'll notice that there's a little bit down here in southern Spain. Who has been in that region of southern Spain? Muslims. So that explains that. But where you notice where a lot of this persecution is, you know, is not necessarily so much Catholic lands, but Protestant lands. But you do have some Catholic lands like France as well where you see that happening. Now, the question that a lot of scholars have when they study the early modern period, why does witchcraft persecution increase? You know, basically in the 1500s and 1600s, in the early modern period. Well, here's the reason why people believe that it is increasing. And I'm going to go through some ideas here. One of the real famous historians of this period is a guy by the name of Keith Thomas, a scholar with two first names, no last name, Keith Thomas. And Keith Thomas wrote a very influential work called Religion and the Decline of Magic. And here's basically one of the things that he said, that he wrote about. It's kind of a very generic summary of the thesis of that book. Keith Thomas said, what did medieval Europeans believe in really more than religion? Magic. Okay? Have you ever read the Grimm fairy tales? What's going on in the Grimm fairy tales?
A lot of magic.
A lot of magic. Is Jesus healing the people in that? Are the bishops healing the people? No, it's magic. It's fairies. It's elves making shoes and Keebler cookies and all of that cool stuff, right? I guess there were Keebler cookies, sorry. But, you know, it's magical stuff. And what Keith Thomas argues is that the reason witchcraft persecution increased is that as the Reformation, okay, is going to start codifying or writing down what being a true Christian is. So Protestants, like Luther's going to write down this is what it means to be a Protestant. Catholics are going to write down this is what it means to be a Catholic. Okay? Mennonites will write down what it means to be a Mennonite. If you write all this down, what it means to be a Christian, what is that going to do? What's the effect of that? That's right. And a lot of people were doing magic, you know? And they're like, oh, you know, this is Christian. I'm going to put down these magic beans and they're going to sprout. And I'm going to have a giant beanstalk. Jesus said that, right?
Yes.
You know, and you see what Keith Thomas is arguing. He's saying that a lot of common people didn't understand the difference between magic and religion because, and this is the part where Brian could get fired. So, you know, if you want to report me to administration, this is the time to do it. But this is Keith Thomas's idea, your big boys and girls. Oh, I am on video too. Well, it's been nice knowing you all. I'm gonna start retirement a little early, folks. But he said, a lot of people didn't understand the difference between religion and magic because there's a lot of magic in religion. Let me give you a case in point. Not to offend anyone who's Catholic. Is anyone Catholic in here? Cody is, Katie is. You're Catholic.
Bad Catholic.
Bad Catholic. Bad
Not very
Catholic.
good.
Okay. Are you a good Catholic? No. Who's a good Catholic?
Cody.
Cody, you're a good Catholic.
Yeah.
Okay, Cody.
Yeah.
He's the best.
Let's say this is the communion cup.
Uh-huh.
Let's say, this is so sacrilegious.
Oh.
Let's say this is the body. Okay, so, got this on video, guys?
Oh, man.
Jesus is a Slim Jim. So here you have it.
I'm writing that down.
When the priest blesses the wafer, what does it literally become in Catholic doctrine?
The body.
The body. When the priest literally blesses the wine, what does it become?
The blood.
The literal blood.
The literal blood. How is that not magic? Isn't the priest like a magician going, pokety pokety?
That's what I said, you're Harry Potter.
Now, I am not trying just to make fun of Catholic belief here. Okay? Actually, I'm not trying to make fun of Catholic belief here. But, if, ladies and gentlemen, you are trying to explain, if you're just common Johann six-pack in Middle Germany, okay? Or, not six-pack like this, but like you drink the beer. Not I am buff, swole Johann of medieval. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. But you're just a common Joe, okay? Common Joe. Are you really gonna know?
No.
Are you gonna see what the priest does different than magic?
No.
So once all of this stuff is starting to be written down, according to Thomas, what's gonna happen to people who don't see the difference?
They're good.
They're gonna get persecuted.
Kill them. Yeah.
So part of the reason why witchcraft persecution comes up is that now that we've codified or written down what it means to be a Christian, there are a lot of people who their behavior was a little bit different. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the holidays that we had were basically based on pagan times to party.
Yeah.
And so people wouldn't understand the difference. I mean, first of all, let me kind of give you this idea of what carnival is. There's only one carnival really left in the United States, and that's Mardi Gras.
Oh my gosh.
You guys know what Mardi Gras is?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not particularly Christian, is it?
No.
No.
Witch doctors.
Yeah. Scary.
Yeah, you have witch doctors and you have all those kinds of things. And what carnivals basically would do would be an opportunity to basically debauch, to go party it up and have fun. And there were a lot of paganism involved in this. So you could just party it up, have good times. And one of the things that they would do, a lot of times social leveling was involved in this. I don't know if you've ever seen the Disney movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. You know, at the start of this, Quasimodo, the Hunchback, is elected what? King of the Fools. And I don't know if you ever thought about this for a little bit, but why didn't medieval peasants, who were like 95% of society, just rise up and like kill the nobles? Nobles didn't have no stinking machine guns. You got one sword and you got armor, but if you bomb rush them with 2,000 peasants, they're taking down the dude with a sword. He may hack 14 of them to death, but you've still got 1,986 who can take down that noble jerk. So how do they get around that? Well, carnival, and they would do this usually about every quarter. There would be a carnival. And what would happen is that somebody would be selected, some common person would be the king of the fools for that particular time. Like Quasimodo was in that. And so a common person would get to go into the castle, and be the Lord, and the nobles would have to provide food, a buffet for the common people to come in, and they could get drunk and party and do the things that people do when they get drunk and party. It was like a social safety valve. And you do this 4 times a year, and people are like, yeah! But what starts happening, like when Protestants come to power? Do they like this? No, because what do Protestants generally not enjoy? Parties. Is that they were really against kind of this social leveling. And there was a strain of Protestantism, not the Lutheran branch, but that was against drink. So they were totally against that. Folks, to show you how much they were against this, the Pilgrims who came to New England outlawed Christmas. They outlawed Christmas for 150 years after they arrived. No. You know why? They thought it was pagan in origin. Saturnalia, and what are people doing? They're just going around getting wassail, which is kind of an alcoholic beverages. They're singing rowdy songs, going from place to place, knocking on your doors. It's just an excuse for a party. You to go home and think deep thoughts about Jesus. I'm serious.
That's how they celebrated his birthday?
Yes. Being very prim, very proper. I mean, look at pictures of pilgrims. Do they look like they want to party? No.
So why didn't they like the Protestants like the social leveling?
Because, remember, one of the other things, sola scriptura.
Oh.
Is there any carnival in the Bible? If it's religious, it's got to come from that. Where did most of these carnivals come from? Pagan traditions. So throw them out.
Didn't marriages have like 3-day parties afterwards?
Yes, they sure did.
Did they get rid of those two?
Yes.
Aw, man.
Didn't like that stuff. And because of this confessionalization, you can see that these carnivals kind of go out. Does that make sense? And, witchcraft really in many ways is kind of this remaining paganism that's in Europe. Okay? And, if you look at it, there's part of me that says, well, maybe. But there's part of me that says, there still was a lot of paganism in Europe. They might have called it Christianity. But you look at all the fairy tales you read as a child. Little Mermaid, pagan. Cinderella, pagan. Snow White, pagan. Beauty and the Beast, pagan, pagan, pagan. Okay. Toy Story, not pagan.
Yes.
But you know what I mean, though. A lot of paganism. So one of the things that's also going to happen during this is there's going to be a guy by the name of Jean Delamot. He's a 20th century French historian. And Delamot, and I'm going to come back to these other 3, but I don't have time before we get out of here to get into those other 3. Delamot is going to write a thesis that I think is going to be pretty compelling. We're going to be looking at the Grimm fairy tale books coming up pretty soon, some of those tales. And one of the things, and you're going to be examining Delamot's thesis. Delamot argues basically, pretty controversially, that Europe was never really Christian. That it was really pagan. That most of the major holidays, Easter has an egg, that's pagan fertility cult time. It's not really anything to do with Jesus' resurrection. Christmas, the evergreen tree is not really a Christian symbol. It's based on Saturn. And he goes through all of this stuff. And he basically says that Europe was never really Christian. Christian leaders in the Reformation, in the early modern period, wrote down what it meant to be a Christian, and then went and persecuted the tar out of people who weren't in this witchcraft stuff. And then the era that comes next is the Enlightenment. And what happens in the Enlightenment? What?
New ideas.
There are new ideas, but are they religious ideas?
No.
What are they? They're really a rejection of religious ideas. And it's focused on science, reason, and natural explanations, not metaphysics. What Delamot argues is that Europe was never fully religious. You would say the elites were religious, but the popular people really weren't. And he would look at things like the Grimm fairy tales, which were published around 1800. And if you read them, where's Jesus? I mean, if you look at all of the pop folk tales, he's nowhere to be mentioned, or the church or religion. Now, he is not arguing there was no Christianity whatsoever in Europe, but he said, we always talk about it widespread. He said it was more lip service. Okay? He's saying that's really what it is. Okay? He says, and so he argued that once they tried to foist leadership in Europe with the Reformation, both Catholic and Protestant reform, tried to strictly define what Christianity is, then the next era of leadership in the Enlightenment said, forget it all. We're going to be secular. And Europe ever since has been fairly secular. It's an interesting thesis. It's very controversial. There are historians who accept Delamot. There are historians who furiously reject him. I just find it kind of interesting. I kind of vacillate depending on my mood whether I think it's right or wrong, but I do really think if you look at like the Grimm fairy tales, you're like, maybe the average person wasn't quite as Christian as what we think. Tomorrow we'll spend a little bit of time looking at confessionalization and Baroque art. All right, thank you.